Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin, your host, and this week we'll begin a series on play. As we start the month of September, which we're all kind of quote unquote back to school and we're changing of seasons, I really dug deep and thought this is a perfect time to talk about play, especially as we go into a formal school setting, whether it's a formal setting outside of your house or inside of your house. I really want to share with parents the whole concept of what is play, especially to the child, but to us, the grown-ups, the parents, the educators, the therapists, the support people, because I think we've kind of fallen off the rails when it comes to play and childhood. And I know looking back historically, things are always changing, right? Human nature. We learn a little and we swing the pendulum far away to what the midline should be. And then we look back and we say, whoops, let's see if we can readjust. But I do think, especially the American culture, because that's what I can speak of. But I know in researching for these next few episodes, I really understand that many of these play-based concepts and theories and implementation is really across most cultures. But today, I'm speaking through the American eye, that we surely have kind of steered off course, and things have shifted for our children, and I think we've lost the concept or the feeling of play. And yet, when I look into the research or into educational curriculum or what's driving, how to teach the child. We don't even know how to define play, and why is that important? So my goal here is to really increase everybody's awareness that play is instinctual and that it's really part of our human nature, and it really is the medium in which we learn so much. Not only language-based learning, like, that's kind of my jam, but really the nonverbal, the social, the whole human connection. We do it and practice these opportunities through play. So just to let you know what my plan of action is, that today's session, I'm going to talk about the history and some of the science. And it's a relatively new, or should I say, it's an area of research that is finally getting some legs and some expansion. Even though for the last 50, 60 years, there's been some interesting work in what is play and how do adults live their life based on their experience in play as a child, and how we may or may not carry those play styles, those play personalities into our adult life, and how does all that connected. But so this episode, I'm going to talk about some of that science and how I got involved over the last couple of years. I will in this series be very specific with strategies that you should be looking into and seeing if you, I hate to use the word should, but could be incredibly helpful as we move into this season, a new school year, a new fall, a new opportunities to take a look at how you interact with your children, individually, one-on-one, as well as the family. I have developed a playful guide, which will help with some of these definitions, some of these strategies and techniques, as well as a list of different kind of just play opportunities for the various ages. So keep in mind that, here I'm focusing on babies, toddlers, and preschoolers, but it should be carried out. And, many of you have kids of different ages. And it's interesting to look at the research, and that when kids of different ages play together, then you get a whole different opportunity to grow and learn and build relationships and self-awareness when there are different ages. So again, that could lean toward a plus for a multi-age classroom setting. Maybe at home, maybe in a chapter school or in a pod, and perhaps the public schools could start considering something along those lines, but that's for a different conversation. Another thing that I want to also take note in is, even though I'm talking about the children, the key kind of implementer or the director of all of this is you, the parent, right? And we cannot ignore our role, what we're doing right, what we could be doing better, what areas can we expand upon, what are our expectations, and how can we help guide through play experiences to help our kids kind of really grow and thrive through their daily life, right? So, I do think many adults, including myself, and I will share some stories about, my adult life, right? And my childhood, in the sense that we have kind of lost our way. As I said in the beginning, that so many parents say to me, when I model how to play with their 2-year-old or their 3-year-old or their 6-year-old, that they simply say, I don't know how to play. I'm not much of a player, or I can't do what you do. I can't act silly. I feel silly when I do that, or I make those funny faces, or I just, how can I ignore their acting out or their tantrum or whatever and try to redirect them through play when don't I have to address their bad behavior? And so I really think that many, many parents are asking these questions, and they feel a little guilty for playing or being lighthearted, or maybe they don't, they think of it as a structured, like a card game, or, something, let's go play t-ball, something very, very specific. But play is really a medium, like I said, to really give the opportunities to explore, relate to other people, to build problems or to build solutions to problems, and to build a stronger, more efficient neural network of thinking. That's what we are. We think and we organize. But a lot of this research is really started, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I'll share some of the books that I've been diving deep into. But Dr. Stuart Brown, who I guess is the guru of play research, but really went into studied the animals in the wild and how the animal kingdom have these remarkable play-based exchanges with one another, and how we as a human race also have used play with some animals, with each other, with different age groups to really help foster and build connection. But it goes so much deeper than that. And I've always understood it from a language-based learning perspective, because that's what I do for a living, right? I play on the floor with kids. But if I go back to my training, and I think I shared this in the first couple of episodes, I wasn't interested in working with children because they did make me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know how to play with them. I kind of lost that, as I left high school and went on to college. That I will share with you, that in my 20s, I looked at it as my decades of hell, because I was so serious. I was so committed, working through undergrad and graduate school and getting a professional degree and working in the hospitals, because God forbid that I play with kids and, have to get on the floor and get messy and dirty and be lighthearted. And if you talk to anyone that knew me when I was in my 20s, I was not lighthearted. But I lost my sense of play because I did have it in growing up. I've shared with you before here that, I was part of a very large Irish Catholic family. We were military. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And it was in the 60s and 70s. And we, settled in after traveling around with my dad, who was in the military, and many of us being born in different states, but we settled in a small town, when I was in elementary school in upstate New York. And, we played with each other. We played outside. We played with the neighborhood's kids. We always figured out something to do. And it was, again, I look back and I think I was pretty blessed on many levels that, TV was just something that you watched cartoons on Saturday, maybe a Disney show on Sunday night. And then we figured it out on our own, right? We had good times and not so good times with our neighborhood friends. But we always, had something to do, and going out into the woods and the creeks. And my brother just reminded me how, for a couple of years, I think I was permanently barefoot, and that my feet were so chronically dirty that I was just outside all the time. And so it was a very different upbringing. It was a very different experience than what the modern day. And not to say that, some families don't still live that way. I currently live in Vermont, and I know that there are farm families and country-based families that are still very, very outside. But it tends to be a little bit more contrived, a little bit more structured. The average family is a little bit more overprotective. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the theories of why play has been lost, and that we as a culture, as a society, whether we're the parent or the educators or, the quote unquote professionals that are trying to support, healthy environments, that we have kind of lost that spontaneity. And I'm going to talk about the science behind that, and how it could be, how it seems to be affecting our children. And what can we do today? You mom, you dad, you grandparents, us, educators and teachers and therapists, that we have to really step back and take a really, really honest and healthy perspective of what can we do differently to help our young children and ourselves develop a healthier, more balanced well-being, because we can regain our sense of play and gain the benefits from it at any age, because we, based on the science and how it's really being validated in real life, that we as a human race need to get back there if we're going to create a healthier, more robust lifestyle and continue to expand on this universe. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the series begins to unfold. But I do want to go back to being a little bit more specific about what is play, what are some of the play styles that we need to take a look at through early development and beyond. So let me kind of line that up for us so we can be really clear of what are we talking about when I talk about play with your kids. So let me start with introducing the work by Dr. Stuart Brown, who is the founder of NIFP, the National Institute for Play. What a wonderful organization to kind of work with. But he has built his career, 50 or 60 years, really studying the play of human beings. But he started as a psychiatrist, really looking at how the animals, as I said, animals in the wild play and how we are very, very similar. And he is noted for saying, quote, "We as human beings are built to play and built by play." So as I said, initially as a therapist, as a young adult, when I really looked at children and play and who I am kind of in my 20s and in my 30s, I thought play was just the medium or the vehicle, some of the tools, if you will, that we would use to build human relationships, build language and learning, to increase someone's knowledge base, their understanding. Even in clinical practice, whether you're a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist, a school psychologist, whomever in those helping fields, we talk about play-based therapy or child-led therapy. And what does that really, really, really mean? And should it be just compartmentalized in those situations? And how have we as a culture or a human race, how have we impacted early child development by building a school system that has gotten further and further and further and further away from natural intrinsic play? So let me first kind of set up what the top three kind of larger categories would be. And as a therapist, I've always worked within these. You have free play, you have structured play, and then we can talk about mixed aged play. And they're pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's really important in this day and age that parents really understand the differences, because I think that's where we have restricted the our perception, and now it's limiting our kids. So free play, as it implies, is self-directed, it's self-chosen, that the child's intrinsic motivations kind of navigate, and that free play is what the child wants to do, not what the adults want the child to do. And children in free play develop a sense of self. They improve their motor, their emotional, social, and cognitive skills. Then free play is critical, especially to the children's first 3, 4, 5 years of life, to really build a healthy sense of self. And then there's structured play, and structured play is kind of defined for young children, that this type of play are activities led by an adult Typically, a playful classroom lesson can facilitate learning, playful group activities that will help support social emotional skills. And it could even be an organized recess activity. All of that is part of the whole umbrella of play skills. It's not an either or, both are important. And if the child or an adult, you and I should have good play skills too. But if we follow kind of our natural interests, then free and structured play can be fun and deeply meaningful. And so I think it's important that when we look at how do our children spend their daytime, right? Whether they're homeschooled or they go off to a preschool setting or a daycare setting. Sometimes we pack so much in that free play is lost completely. Or we call it free play, but it's really turned into a structured adult-led activity. And so the child is really just kind of a piece to the puzzle of the schedule for the day. And then the third type would be a mixed age play. And this was fascinating for me to really kind of dive deeper into, because the research is pretty compelling where, when you have a wide range of kids, and, sometimes you have to be thoughtful, but a 3, 5, 6, 7-year-old, they can easily play together. And it's interesting because those groups tend to be less competitive and much more nurturing. In a mixed age play group, each child does try to do their best, but there's little to no concern with actually beating other kids. And I've done this a lot in my practice where I've had siblings come in, or we've had play dates where I've had multiple kids, different age groups. And they really do try to help each other out a lot more than you would think. And, I've spent a lot of times both in California and here in Vermont working in the Waldorf school setting. And they too can have different mixed age group classrooms. So in this kind of situation, the younger kids learn skills that are more sophisticated through their older classmates. And in turn, the older kids benefit in learning how to nurture, or how to be patient, or how to lead without being pushy. Yes, you're going to have strong-willed personalities, and I can often see that in different classrooms. But overall, the kids figure it out, right? They figure out, and that's sort of how I felt, being one of 9 kids and being very close in age. My mom had her 5th, but before the oldest was even 5. But, you had this multi-age family, or in our case, a tribe. And you did learn from each other, and you picked your allies, and at times you picked your enemy, but it was an interesting makeup where you really could be supported and learn from each other and learn to nurture and take care of and protect one another depending on the situation. And that would happen out, in the neighborhood, and where we would, play at the park or play at an empty lot and just, pick up a game of kickball or dodgeball or whatever was going on that evening. So I do really suggest that, you, my listener, would really benefit from looking at Dr. Brown's work. And his book that was published, I guess, in 2009 is called Play, of course, but How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. and is actually now translated in 12 different languages. So it's pretty remarkable. And if you want to listen to it on audio, as you're doing other things, that's always a great way to get a wealth of information in a short amount of time. But I use it kind of as a reference. So interestingly, this play science is really expanding, and that the kids are being exposed or given less and less opportunities to really have true play-based learning experiences. And that neuroscience researchers believe that that they're starting to define distinctive biomarkers for play, which is fascinating to me. And these biomarkers are similar to what they have established for sleep and dreams, and that there's evidence suggesting that play deprivation, that means, say your 2, 3, 4-year-old is kind of in a highly structured school setting, or doesn't have, or is not exposed to a lot of outdoor kind of spontaneous play, or given the freedom to explore different, environments in the house, but that the play deprivation is very similar to the side effects of sleep deprivation, and that there are profound negative consequences. And Dr. Brown's work is really illuminating some of the stress, the anxiety, the depression that seems to be expanding with, every generation, but with what I think everybody has been exposed to over these last 2 years. We really need to take a closer look at how we schedule our days, allowing time in our day for kids to just be, and just to play, and just to be creative, and to have the opportunity to learn through social play. So let me just kind of give a side note, because I do think the word play gets a bad rap. And, I know that therapists have been kind of confronted with parents and saying, well, what are you doing? You're just playing with my kid. How you need to do quote unquote work, or you need to do something more intensive. And I think when parents now look at schools, they're looking for quote unquote academic outcomes, or they're looking at that schedule or that quote unquote curriculum. And I put all these words in in quotes, because I think it's trickled down to our youngest, our preschool and our kindergarten and our first grade level environments. And that is not necessarily healthy. And our kids are beginning to suffer, and or they are suffering, and we as the grown-ups are beginning to recognize that maybe this is not the best medium to bring out his or her fullest potential. So let me give you Dr. Brown's definition of play. Quote, "Play is a state of mind that one has when absorbed in an activity that provides enjoyment and a suspension of sense of time. And play is self-motivated, so you want to do it again and again." And as I mentioned, the 3 formats of different play would be free play, structured play, and mixed aged play. But under that, there are 7 different types of play. And over the next couple of weeks or episodes, I will dive deep into each one of these. But today, I just want to kind of outline them for you. You can do a little Google yourself, Dr. Brown, Stuart Brown, Stuart, and I will have some links below in the description for his book and and his wonderful website, where he really has some good blog articles about how this can be fit into your daily life, into when you look at the school setting, but also with the very, very young, because play really does start. And again, it goes to that, what is play? And I think the adults, and it could be the 20-somethings or the 30-somethings, the young adults even, can have a disconnect because we have looked at play and work as opposites. But Dr. Brown really takes a good different perspective, a good stronger perspective where work is not the opposite of play, but he even suggests that depression is the opposite of play. That when we don't have that gleefulness, that joy, that compassion or curiosity, that ability to share with others and be connected in something that could be competitive but playful, could be lighthearted and yet intense, all at the same time. That when we don't have those opportunities, those periods in our day, in our week, in our life, that we do start to feel less and less robust, less and less connected. And that's where depression and anxiety and worry and fret take over, because we have to be able to laugh and giggle and push ourselves to being creative or thoughtful. And we'll dive deep into these 7 different types of play, as I said, but today I want to just kind of touch upon them, and I want you as the parent to really contemplate, to think about, what do you do as an adult, and then how do you influence or guide the young people in your life. So let me just run through these, and then I'll give you kind of a quick summary. Attunement play, which starts, again, think of attune, right? Being connected, starts in those first couple of months of life, somewhere around the 3rd month, that you're really connecting with your infant, right? The parent and the infant gaze. There's that smile and cooing that I talked a lot about in previous episodes. The sing-song or parent ease, right? You're getting them auditorily and visually connected with us. And both the parent and the infant's right hemisphere lights up when I can coo and the baby coos, and I smile and the baby smiles, and we make that eye contact. That is the very first stage, or laying that foundation to a play state, a union, right? A connection. And this is universal across all cultures, according to Dr. Brown's research. And that we're really beginning to create that neural pathway for building a trust and a sense of well-being, of feeling grounded. You know what it feels like when you hold that baby and you're just, the world stops around you, right? And you're just in it for that, whether it's a moment or several moments, you're just cooing and smiling, and you smell your baby and they smell you, and your eyes lock, and you're just in that moment. And that is beautiful, but that's the first foundation, laying that foundation for human play. The next one would be body and movement play. Again, once your infant begins to squirm, they do squirm in the womb. Of course, all of us moms have felt that. But quickly after birth, they wiggle, they rock, they scoot, they begin to roll and crawl, and then soon they're running and climbing up all kinds of things. But the research tells us for this level of body and movement play, that we as human beings, it's intrinsic to us, that we're motivated to explore and move our bodies and to learn through this play. That's why these kids climb on everything and jump on everything and touch everything. that we know movement activates areas of the brain that are connected to learning. And we've seen this over and over again, especially in the last, 20, 25 years. So what research has been showing is that there are periods of greatest movement are also the time that the most rapid growth happens in the cerebellum. And this kind of supports my theory that kids, over all of my 35 years of practice, really seem to have this explosion in language, in social maturity, social connection, in ability to wait and be patient, to be able to tolerate transitions and whatnot. But in the month of August, and I've always kind of, we in my field have kind of joked that something just happens in that August. And I think it's because there's a shift, right? Maybe the structure of summer events are a little lighter. There's still a lack of scheduling, because schools haven't started. Maybe there's more family time. A lot is just happening, and maybe more outdoor times. The kids are barefoot, they're happy, they're getting dirty, all of these kinds of things. There's something about just that period where there's a lot of action in the body, yet at the same time, there's a lot of deep rest and recovery. And that's where the most rapid growth happens in the cerebellum. So it's just an interesting connection that I've made over the years. So with that, we have the attunement play, we have body and movement play, and then I will talk about the third play, which is object play. And again, this makes sense when you have a newborn, when you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, their curiosity about objects, anything beyond themselves, really, that it seems to be pervasive and it's innate to them, and it's fun and intriguing, and that Dr. Brown's work really studies to look at, what they are interested in, anything outside of them, whether it's your hair or your earrings, keys, teething rings, the glasses on your face, spoons, anything that they can reach and touch and their little hands can grab a hold of, that's their form of play. And again, over the years, I've had so many parents, so many kind of parents who intuitively understand that this is just a phase and they're just exploring things. But I've also at the same time seen parents just get so tired and frustrated that they're touching their hair and they're touching their earrings and they're pulling on their shirt and they're pulling, they're wiggling and crawling all over them because they're just interested in exploring objects and things and touching it and feeling it and putting it close to their mouth and doing all of these things that but that's what they're learning. That's what they're trying to figure out. And they don't really understand the term. And I've mentioned this before. They don't know what dangerous is. They don't know that it's breakable. They don't know that it's fragile. They don't know that your glasses are expensive or that you're exhausted. They're just seeing objects in their reach and they're going for it. And they need to touch it. And they need to touch it again and again and again. And that's their curiosity. And we don't really want to squash that. We really want to help them build a differentiation over time of what is, appropriate play objects and what isn't. But, over time, they're fascinated with, working, just touching things right in the beginning, that first year, that 18 months, that 24 months. And then they get better with their hand manipulations so they can maybe control some large buttons or open and close some latches. Think of all those quote unquote educational, I say that softly because there's no really good research, but we do know that kids like to touch things. So, open and close some latches, some locks. Again, every single office I've ever been in, we're on our way out, we're transitioning. I'm saying goodbye to the mom. I've learned the rhythm of how to read kids and it's time to go, but they open and close the lock on my door, open and close, 20 times, turn off and on the lights. I don't even notice anymore as long as the kids are safe and they're fine, but they need to touch things. They need to do things with whatever objects are in their vicinity. But then they improve. Their play skills get more sophisticated and they begin to skip rocks or they begin to, do more sophisticated things with their hands, but it takes time, right? Those circuits, the pathways, the neural pathways in the brain become more and more refined with experience. They have to do this for the first 2 years and 3 years and 4 years. And then, all of a sudden you have a 4-year-old who, has manipulated a lot of different objects from puzzles. Now he moves into kicking a ball or throwing a ball, or she's, pretty good at stacking balancing blocks, or, then they, get good at just throwing wads of paper in the trash can. And again, in my therapy practice, I do a lot of movement. I do a lot of kind of sensory processing activities because I know that builds language processing. It also builds their attention. But so I do a lot of work with painter's tape, different colors, right? And they have to peel it off the board and then they wad it up using both hands and the strength, and they make a nice ball and they throw it in the trash can. But that is that processing, that hierarchy from, tugging on your hair and pulling on your jacket and ripping off your glasses off your face, of that object play. And now he or she is into, throwing balls or kicking balls or, playing lacrosse here or soccer or those kinds of object-based play. So those are the first 3 types of play that Dr. Brown has kind of established, and many of the play-based or play scientists. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into those 3 because they apply the most to the youngest kids. But in the next episodes, I'll dive into imaginative and pretend play. And then there's social play, which includes kind of 3 different criterias where they begin to belong, and we walk through how you can have parallel play, and then you can have joint play. But under social play, you can have a sense of belonging. You can have that rough and tumble play that we'll talk a lot about. And then another kind of social play, which is called celebratory. And those are things that we do in our different cultures. And then there is storytelling and narrative play. So those are the major types of play. I shared with you in more detail what attunement play was, body and movement play, and object play. And then next session, I'll dive a little bit deeper. And I just want you to perhaps start thinking about where is my child in these kind of different types of play? How do I foster and support them? How do I feel about play in general? And I know it's tricky because we as adults will often think the opposites of work and play. But, what I've always said to parents is that, our kids, their quote unquote job is to grow and learn, right? And to develop human skills, communication skills, to throw in some academics there so that they're that they can learn more. I'm still one of a big proponent looking at, reading, writing, and math in those first few years of school, and then that doesn't limit them. If they become competent readers and writers and verbal communicators, and that they have an appreciation for numbers, then they can continue to foster that and learn a wide variety of information and skill. But let's go back to, in order to get there, right? I've always said here on these episodes, and my podcast kind of message is, keep in mind what our end goal is. Our end goal is for that, ultimately to raise a happy, healthy, thriving, independent thinker, as a young adult. But to get there, we first have to get him or her to, their 7th birthday, where they can be, have these basic academic skills. But before you get there, you have to have this human communication, this thought, this relationship building, problem solver, this thinker. It doesn't have to mean that he or she will, solve the world's problems, but they have to have enough practice in using thinking and language-based thought and human connection and navigating this world, whether it's in the family situation or on the playground or in the classroom or, in a busy, store, that they have to be able to understand how their environment is unfolding and then react to it. And then at the same time, hopefully, have enough wherewithal that they can, begin to appreciate what interests them and what makes them smile and be engaged. And then they can build upon that to create a happy, healthy lifestyle. And so for today, I just want to close with something that Dr. Brown really continually shares with us. So he says, quote, "Actualizing one's deepest talents is associated with an engaged sense of play. Keeping play in one's life is vital to a successful life journey. As such, it is important for parents and caregivers of very young children to recognize and nurture the preferences for varied environmental triggers that produce spontaneous glee in infants and young children. In other words, we as the adults need to stay present, need to stay aware of what lights our kids up, and to recognize that we, in the very beginning, with that, remember that picture of, us moms, playing with that newborn that was 1, 2, 3 months old, and getting them to smile and coo and babble, and what that feels like. And then, your little one who's finally figured out how to crawl, or who has finally figured out how to, climb up on the high chair with great joy and independence, what really makes them tick. And what I will talk about once we kind of go through these different types of play, Dr. Brown has also generated kind of different personalities. It's not necessarily based in, scientific measure and all of that, but he's created these 7 personalities, play-based personalities, that you and I can kind of identify where we fall in there. And what's important is that then we can perhaps look at our child and say, oh, he is a XYZ, and because he likes to do this, and this is what lights him up, and this is what makes him, feel good about himself. This is what makes him feel independent and competent and self-reliant. And we're all kind of cut from different cloths, and we all have our own different rhythms, but we follow these certain kinds of patterns. And so that's what Dr. Brown's work has been, is to really open our minds up to how play-based learning, or learning through play, really helps build a healthy, competent, capable, creative thinker. And that's what you and I are here to do, right? We're here to look at our youngest, our most vulnerable, and say, how can we not forget where we've come from and still appreciate this modern world without losing ourselves in the middle of it. And so that's why this month I'm dedicating to play, and how we can find that ebb and flow. Remember, I always say that there isn't a real balance, right? That, as we begin to transition back into the school, whether it's a public school or a private school, or a school at home, or maybe you're doing a little bit of each, or you're just thinking about, you don't know what's going to happen. But I want you to think about how you spend your time and how playful that you are with your children, and with yourselves, and with your spouse, and with your partner, and with your friends, and at home and at work. And we can talk more and more about that. But go ahead and check out Dr. Stuart Brown's work. I'll have the link down below, and we'll talk more about these different types of play that our children and we can really dive deep into and expand ourselves even further. So with that, thank you so much again for spending time with me on Talking Toddlers. And as we move forward, today, as I said, I'm talking about the history, some of the science. I will give and share more specifics of what you and parents can do at home, and caretakers and grandparents. I will have a link to the Playful Guide. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll also be sharing my 3P framework course and when that's going to be launched. So that will be very exciting. But I do want to keep you abreast of upcoming projects. Don't forget to subscribe to Talking Toddlers. You don't want to miss any episodes. With that, you can also then be the first to participate in some of the fall's launch specials. And so I'm excited to do that. Go ahead and subscribe, share with your friends and your family or your colleagues and your schools, because I think we all can benefit from we can all benefit from more play in our lives. And so thank you very much for spending this time with me once again, and go out and play, play, play.